Okay, before we start, there are a few things that I have to say. So, usually I give this talk with somebody and not alone, and he uses animations on his slides, so some of these slides might be much more exciting to me than they are to you, because I don't really know what's happening. Second thing is that the talk is usually around 35 minutes long, so I had to cut. Of course, I cut from his part, because I don't know it that well, then I know my part. If that was the best decision content-wise, might be debatable. And the third is, now that I'm running through both of our parts, I realized if you start a drinking game to drink a shot every time that I say the word production, you're not gonna make it through this talk. You're not gonna make it till slide 6 or so. Okay, testing in production, that's why this is an interesting question. It was an interesting question, as you can have a talk like this can go in a lot of different directions. This talk is more a general overview and introduction into everything. So I want to motivate why you should be testing in production in the first place. There may be people already doing this, and what techniques do they use to do so? And what problems might occur and how to tackle them? And finally, how can you start moving more testing in production? But first, I have bad news for you, because your staging environment is lying to you. What's staging environment? Staging environment is designed to be a duplication of your production, so you can do some testing on a production-like environment to prohibit bugs from entering your actual live systems. I think nearly everybody has a system like that. Some call it integration, some call it pre-production, some call it approval environment. Here in this talk, when I say staging, I mean your production-like environment. And we spend a lot of money on that, because we cannot for example, we have to buy more hardware. We cannot possibly be like production, just a fraction of the hardware resources. We also might have to license more software. And we will have higher maintenance efforts, because we have to keep our software and patch levels from production and staging kind of in sync to be equal to each other. And it's Spock. What's missing here is you also need people doing all this, taking care of that. So here's our staging environment. Here's its goal, be like production. Here's our big pile of money we spend on it. And here's what's wrong with that. Staging environment will never be like your production environment. You will have different hardware. You will have different CPUs, different memory banks or something like that. Or you will have slightly less hardware resources. You will have different server setups, for example, in terms of scalability and load balancing. And no matter how hard you try, you will have different patch levels, security patch levels on these two environments. Even your own application might be different on the one environment to the other, because you set it to different log levels to log different forms of information, or because you use some specific test data. And finally, at least if you're working in an enterprise environment, all the other systems you're talking to, they're staging environments too. That's not the neighborhood you keep in production. But there is a place where you and your users test use the software on the same patch level and software versions, where you have the best possible or representative test data available, and where your neighbor systems are almost never down, because it's their production environment and they have to have it up and running for their own sakes. And finally, where every problem you find is a problem your users are facing right now. So imagine answering to, well, works on my machine, with, okay, it doesn't work on 2 million customer machines, so maybe we want to look into that. So, okay, where is that place? It's your production environment. And before we go deeper on this, let's first look a little bit at our scan results, because actually, as I saw from the hand raising here, that's not something where no man has gone before. There are a lot of popular techniques to test in production right now. If you're building a customer-facing app, this is a very popular set of techniques. So you give a subset of end users the application and let them interact with it, let them use it, listen to their feedback, and maybe watch what they're doing in some kind of analytics. So there are different flavors to this. Dog fooding basically means you and your development team or people close to you use your software a little bit earlier than you release it to the general public. A/B testing, where you roll out different flavors of a feature to a subset of users to test which one works better for them. And then there's beta testing. Beta testing is something the games industry does for at least 25 years. That's how long I can read and play computer games. And so that's not exactly new. And it's still very powerful. So take my last project, for example. We were building a mobile payment solution, and we had to test, and because there's money involved, we had extensive beta tests with the partnering stores where you could pay with our apps. So the process should go like this. You shop your groceries, you put them on a belt, you show your app, you pay, you leave the store. During my tests, I shopped my groceries, I put them on a belt, I showed the app, I didn't pay, and I left the store. So if you want a bug named after you in management meetings, stealing money is obviously a good way to do it. To be fair to me, I told them that I probably didn't pay because there was something off with the paper slip, something I didn't have in the staging environments. And to be fair to them, even if I didn't, they would have caught me anyways. The monitoring would have caught me. Sufficiently advanced monitoring is indistinguishable from testing. I wouldn't go so far that you can replace testing with monitoring, but it is a very powerful tool. Although when putting the slide deck together, I realized that this quote is already almost 10 years old. And the talk from Ed Keys. So monitoring hasn't gotten worse in the last 10 years. So looking at assessing your app and looking at the monitoring data available is a very powerful tool for testing. And you can do that with it's a very powerful tool to assess what your software is actually doing right now in production and looking at this. So short highly theoretical example. Let's say you stored your password, your login passwords, login credentials in plain text. And because your social media department just bragged about this on Twitter, you have to do something about this. So now it's hashes. You want to send hashes in and here. You build this feature, you release it to production, and it's a website, so you have extensive logging on all the requests, and now you look at your monitoring. So the red line is where you released. And the green thing is your successful logins. And oh shit, they're going down. So you build a feature, you released it, and then you look at your monitoring, everything's going down. Now you have two options. A, panic. B, look at more monitoring data. So try to correlate that with something else. Maybe look at how many people are trying to log in. And you see, okay, my attempted logins are going down too. So that I have less successful logins when less people are trying, that makes sense. But why are less people trying? So let's see how many people hit our login page in the first place, so maybe something's off there. I can see that too. I can see which pages are being hit. And can so actually use this monitoring to test into this release of this feature. And I see the calls to the login, to the web page, they go also down. So I'm now somewhat sure that I didn't screw up the login itself because this all works nicely together, but I'm still not sure about why do I have that situation in the first place. A lot of things that happen in the life system and that you see in monitoring are seasonal, are periodically. So let's take a step back and look at it for 2 days. And when you look at it like that, you see that you have this wave form, and you see that when we released at exactly that peak. So when we look afterwards on what happens, of course we're going to panic mode and seeing what's going to go on here. So what we learned from this is we most likely don't have a problem, at least we're not seeing it here. And the second thing is, well, maybe we don't release at that peak, because then we will have heart attacks every time we want to look at our monitoring afterwards. And learning that, that's testing. That's using your monitoring for testing. Okay. This goes very well together with deployment strategies like dark launching, blue-green deployment, canary builds, which is one of the parts from my partner. You could come up to me afterwards, but he had all the examples for that. So all this monitoring stuff and all the A/B testing, dogfooding, beta testing that we did, it basically when you want to put that all together, it's like gathering feedback, you know. I deploy my software to the production servers, release it to a subset of users or nodes or whatnot, and start gathering some data to evaluate this. A lot of people think, and I think that too, is that there's value in distinguishing these two terms. You know, deployed means the code is installed on production and on the production servers, and released means it's affecting end users, it's live. So if you distinguish it, like if you make this distinction, you can think about pushing more of your testing to production. For example, running some automated checks or running some exploratory testing sessions when your code is deployed but not yet released. Like this, you'd get all the benefits that we had earlier, for example, that you test in the same environment your users are using it on. So that looks like a ground mission, so let's start trying to look at this more. But, oh, wait. Did I just tell you to put your actual test, you know, not some feedback gathering, some looking into your actual testing to production? Well, we have been told that that can possibly work, right? And we can think of a lot of reasons why that can possibly work. So the first thing is, if I can use the feature, if it's accessible to me, how is it not at the same time, while being partially untested, accessible to the users? How can I avoid that? So, and here's now where Benny would go, like, yeah, well, there are actually things how you can avoid that. And one technique like this is, one very popular thing is feature toggling. So you say feature toggling basically means I have my old version, I have the old version of my feature and I have the new version of my feature, and I put them behind some form of toggle that decides which one is executed in situations. And I can use that to separate that on some conditions. For example, that I have some specific test users in my production which can already hit the new feature. So like this, I can say, okay, you are in the test user, use just a regular user, please use the old feature. And you are the test user, you can access the new, can test the new feature. And at some point, you just remove the feature toggle, which in this case is specifically a release toggle. It's a toggle that's hiding releases. Yeah, well, but that's not the only thing that can go wrong, right? So, because we're testers. And things tend to break around us. So I'll probably, you know, what happens if I break production? Isn't that horrible? And yeah, well, when I break an integration environment, you know, I can usually pat myself on the back on, wow, I found something huge here. When I do that on production, the train of thought is more along the lines of, oh shit, what do I do? And nowadays there are a lot of things you can do to avoid that. One thing that came with the whole cloud computing stuff is the term resilience. So adopt technical resilience. This basically means go to your software architects and learn to build a system, or build a system in a way that you don't trust anything running. And so the system must be able to cope with things not being there, with servers not being applicable. There is, I think, an example that everybody knows by now, still telling it, of course, Chaos Monkey from Netflix is a very, very popular thing here, where they put a tool into their production environment that randomly shuts down services. And they said, well, our software needs to be able to handle that. We cannot go down if we do that. And by the way, the Chaos Monkey by now has a big brother, it's called Chaos Kong, and that dude shuts down data centers. whole data centers. So RVS, North America down, Netflix still has to run. There's a second part to that that is equally important, but not that many people discuss it. That's adopt business resilience. You see, coming back to that Netflix example, the technical architecture to deal with that is the one thing. The other thing is that also your business department should prepare for things not working. So when the Chaos Monkey shuts down your recommended movies, it shouldn't just disappear. At this point, they show you the most liked movies or TV shows in your region, so as a fallback, so that not only the technical stuff, but also the business department or the business part shows you something that's generally working. You don't have to be Netflix to do this. If you're building a mobile app and it's used location-based services, for example, please tell your business people that they shouldn't create business cases that rely on location-based services be 100% accurate, because they're not, and they usually do. Another thing that you can do is alert on your monitoring. So when you have a monitoring and, for example, you know that when your resources are like 80 to 85% utilized and then your containers start crashing and restarting and stuff like that, alert yourself maybe with 70% load. And say, okay, when it's going on like this for the next 2 hours, I'll get a problem. I'll start looking into that now, and so I can maybe avoid that I'll get the problems. And can analyze why I get the problems and then fix that to increase my resilience. And last thing is, I'm not the first person that says this, I think, is we work in complex systems and complex systems will fail. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So prepare for that when. Try to reduce your mean time to repair. And there are a lot of powerful tools today out there that can help you with that. A colleague of mine a few weeks ago gave a talk with some live coding where he was deploying something via GitLab into a Kubernetes cluster. And during his talk, the Kubernetes clusters dropped. And he was like, oh, this is a problem. Can you look over here, please, for a minute? And then he went back and everything was up and running again because these tools can repair themselves. There's some troubling thoughts with that as well, but there's a lot of help out there to get this, reduce your mean time to repair. So, another part, a few minutes ago I told you about analytics, about A/B testing, monitoring, and using that data that you gather from production to test, to make decisions. So, at PipelineConf we had a discussion about when I test on production, won't my test data that I create not probably screw up our analytics and make us make wrong decisions? So, first thing you have to ask yourself, quasi-philosophical, how important am I? Do I have hundreds of thousands or millions of users and then I'm there with like 2 testers? Yeah, you're probably not that important to the analytics report of your BI department because you're just 3 or 4 guys and there are millions of others out there. So the risks of you making them make wrong decisions based on the data is very, very slim. Let's say it isn't. When you have several possibilities, for example, you can flag your test data in a certain pattern that can then be excluded from the reports. Or you can separate test data you create and not put it in the same basket than the actual data of the productive users. You can do this, for example, by using feature toggles. Now, the feature toggling I showed you earlier, when you run, you can configure your analytics when I run through the new feature that this is currently not logged as long as it's not released, but just deployed. Or you can build something like you can read from the production, but you cannot write to the production database. So when you want to make a write operation, it's screaming into the void, but not screwing anybody's reports up. So, okay, looks like a typical ground mission. We need a few new crew members. The captain's still in good shape. So the things I just described, 3 problems or concerns that are often voiced when you test in productions, and some possible countermeasures. Neither list is exhaustive. So, but I hope I gave a general overview of what you can do about these common problems. One thing remains though. So, for example, if your system can act resilient, you can recover from errors and downsides, and you have cool deployment strategies in place to roll back or fail forward and whatnot, then maybe you don't care much about breaking production. But what if you don't? You don't have all these things and you're not currently testing in production and you want to start. What do you do about that? So the most important part is to get into the right mindset. So shutting down all your test environments tomorrow, moving everything to production, well, or generally moving everything to production, that won't do you any good. But neither will, okay, this can possibly work here attitude. Instead, try asking yourself, what needs to happen so that I can push some of my testing to production? Then pick one thing you want to move forward. So maybe you want more customer feedback, or you want to run some automated checks after a deployment on your production environment. Or are you possibly your own customer? Are you using the product that you're building? You can do an exploratory test session with your own user on your own app. You know the limitations there. You can just go on and do that. So once you've decided what you want to do, find out what are you already doing in that regard. So if you're building a highly consumer and customer facing app, the chances are you already have customers. So how do you gather their feedback right now? Check your support crew, check social medias, check app store reviews. And by the way, also do that if you're working on back-end services for that, not just if you're working on the front ends. So not just if you're working on the mobile app, also if you provide back-end services for something that customers see how they like it. Or you can go to your monitoring to your operations people and ask, what are you monitoring today? What is already in there and how can I possibly use that? Then widen your activity at a steady rate. So don't jump all in, but always find a sensible next step. So for example, dog fooding is easier than A/B testing because you just need to use your app 3 days before you release it to everybody. Or try to connect the dots between what you see in your monitoring happening and what your customers complain about on other platforms. Try to connect those things. And while you're at it, is there something missing in the monitoring that you want enhanced or some alert that would be helpful to you? Try to put that in. Once you're satisfied with the state of things here and say, okay, this is now good for me, then rinse and repeat. Pick a new thing. But wait. Testing in production, isn't that a huge risk? Haven't we been told for long years to never do that? So, yeah, I have to admit, enhancing your monitoring with things that might currently not be in there, masquerading test data, rolling out new deployment strategies, or building in feature toggles when you currently don't have those. All that is not simple. It adds complexity to your application. And with complexity, there comes risk. If only there was a way to know about risks. Well, test it. If you're basically building features in to enable yourself to test in production, you have to test those features too. Test your monitoring, test your feature toggles, test your deployment strategy. And then put it to use. Start testing in production. Because your staging environment is lying to you. Or as Charity Major puts it, fuck staging. Test in production. Thank you very much.
Can I see any hands? Yes.
Hi. It sounds very promising and interesting, and we also work with a staging environment that is not perfect. Are there any cases where you would not recommend doing this?
It depends. Actually, I had a discussion yesterday evening because yes, there are cases where you cannot put everything into. That's why I said pick one thing, then pick another. Maybe don't pick everything that you're doing and move it to production. So there was somebody from a gaming company, so from a betting company last year, can say we cannot access last night. We cannot access our production, or you cannot move certain tests to production because what we do there might have. Might put our users in harm because it might facilitate bad user behavior, so they might get addicted or something like that. Or also, when I said you have the best possible test data available, if you perhaps work in a bank or medicine, you cannot access that. You need to, for example, you cannot say, okay, all my functional testing I put in production on a bank might not work. This is a case where we might say, okay, but A/B testing, that might still work. So maybe that's something I want to try, but I will maybe not run my exploratory testing session on production because I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not allowed to see half of the data. So, and this is something that's put the most. So the question is, can I put people in harm's way when I do that? I don't care that much about putting numbers into harm's way, but putting people into harm's way. And then this might a question you might ask yourself is, do I really want to do that? Do I really want to move that in medical and safety critical things, or also apparently betting?
Okay. Thank you.
Performance testing and load testing in live. People do it, but a lot of the time people have to do it at 2 a.m., which creates a really bad working culture. So that's a common thing in Leeds. Like where I'm from, anyone who's actually doing load and performance testing in live are doing it in the morning. How do you suggest getting rid of that culture? Is that...
Load testing?
Yeah, so are you talking about load testing and performance testing in live as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
So one of the examples I cut was actually dark launching.
Yeah.
This dark launching is a technique that Facebook introduced in 2008, and they used it specifically for load testing, load and stress testing. This is one form of deployment strategy where I said, okay, I have my old services that are up and running, and I put my new services in there too. I don't give it to users, but I run the production load through it, and they did this with the messenger. So they put the messenger in there and put the load through it, and said, okay, can it withstand the load? And once they knew yes it can, they set it active. And so like this they could do that in parallel.
Cool. So more active kind of thing. We'll get rid of that. Cool. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for the speech. It's not a question, just a fun fact that about monitoring the few years at our company, all graphics were down for 2 hours in Germany, and we were so scary, just tried to investigate what the issue, and eventually we found out that there was a final of World Football Cup. So everyone just watched TV and didn't use our application. So yes, sometimes it's not about issues and tickets and your features, it's just about human behavior.
Yeah. We had that same thing with our payment app. We said when we set that feature live and we said, well, nobody's using it, then it turned Saturday. Apparently that's when people go shopping. Well, it's clear to me now, but it wasn't then.
Thank you. So what I can say again is that definitely there are